If I got to a point where like I was not being the best dad that I could be, and I was not showing up for my kids, and I went to the doctor, my testosterone was like 200 repeatedly, you bet your bottom dollar I would go on TRT if it meant that I could be a better father and have my energy to like maintain it.
Action. I got the man right here, the YouTube sensation, and we are filming. So you know he's going to bring his A game. We don't even have to prep, but guess what? We did a lot of prep this morning. First, a kick-ass workout in the Thomas gym, then a nice trail hike. Now we're ready to get into it. Thank you, Thomas DeLauer. It's good to connect with you since we're neighbors.
Yes.
And we had to travel across the state to meet up since our neighborly interactions are minimal these days, but I look forward to those future times up in Lake Tahoe.
Well, we both literally had trees fall in our houses, so that's why we're displaced at the moment.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about health, fitness, peak performance, fun stuff like that. But like when you cut down a bunch of trees, do other trees become vulnerable to crash into houses? The answer is apparently yes.
Yeah. I mean, the answer was like I wasn't home when the tree fell on my house, so did it make a sound?
Probably, yeah. And Marty and Mindy, our neighbors, can confirm that both sounds were heard on both houses when we're out of town. Oh my gosh. Well, you've had this amazing, journey into the health space coming from the corporate world, and I'd love to just kind of, for those of us not familiar, get into that background a little bit, especially when you hit these interesting extremes, and even now with like creating a bunch of amazing content and pursuing the extreme goals in fitness and health education. It's like you're not a moderation guy delivering the mail every day. You're going for it in life.
Dude, I actually recently filmed a video talking about just that, because I think for a lot of years, I tried to come across as such a normal person to try to like help people, that I realized I was actually doing a disservice, because I was normalizing myself to try to like make sure like, hey, I'm a normal guy. I'm a normal guy.
Toning everything down. Yeah.
Well, which I understand has to be done. But then, people would start to say things like, well, that's just unreal. Like there's no way that you're a normal guy just doing. I'm like, you know what? I have to be real. Like I have extreme circumstances, and I am a little bit of a freak. And I guess in the stage of my life where I just like really truly just want to like be this undying, authentic version of myself, where I just like, it feels good to just be like, guys, like screw it. Like, no, I'm kind of a weirdo. Like it's not normal to do the things that I do. It's not normal to like be obsessed the way that I'm obsessed. Yeah. And I don't want you to be like me, because the world doesn't need more Thomas DeLauers. It would be a scary place. But take little bits of what I know and apply it to yourself. And maybe you can learn from me with little things, but don't try to be like me, because it's not a pretty road.
Yeah, and it's also important to be authentic about that, because I think now we're inundated with this messaging about how you too can level up your life and kick ass and all these things where we easily feel inferior if we're not up to this high level that people are communicating. But why can't we just pick and choose and create the path that we want, where I'm going to take 20% from your deal and 4% from Ben Greenfield's, and also listen to the meditation guru who says that going to the beach and sitting there and staring at the waves is super valuable for 30 minutes while we're crushing it on the, what's the terminology of the workout we did?
It would, I guess, classify under a Metcon, a metabolic condition.
Every
Metcon.
minute
On the minute.
EMOM. Yeah. And so, like, to kind of relieve the pressure of trying to live up to some standard that doesn't feel naturally right to you, I think what you're getting at for the audience. Yeah. And that's okay.
Well, it's okay to have, a season for everything too. Right. And like, I kind of divide my life into these macro seasons and these micro seasons. And I mean, that's periodization in its very nature, right? Like it's just, look at periodization. How do you periodize your training? Do you, escalate? Do you descend? And most of that comes from an external training block, but a lot of it, like I've learned to listen to my body in a sense where, it's okay for me to go through these phases where I really push the stressors as hard as I can, but I've gotten really good at also listening and toning it down, and it comes from like, I think we were talking before we were filming, and I've talked about this in other podcasts before. Like I ran my first 10K when I was, I believe, 6.
Wasn't ran 6 miles at 6.
I mean, it wasn't. Yeah. I'm going to do 1 mile for every year that I am turning. No, I'm saying. But it is. it wasn't fast or anything, but my point was, I started running at a young age. My mom was a runner, and that was how we spent time with mom. Was like, if we wanted to hang out with mom was running. So she was like, hey guys, like, no other choice. I'm not going to push you in a stroller. You're too big. So you're going to run, and mom was a badass, like serious badass with that. And she was fast, and like, she pushed us hard. My sister and I both. My sister's 4 years older. My sister went on to be a professional triathlete. And, it was just like, anyhow, the point is like, I ended up running my first marathon when I was 11, and I ran a number of marathons, and I can't even count how many half marathons before I was like 16. And I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I guess in some ways I am, because it's impressive. I understand now, but I also say that because now, having kids of my own, I can't imagine like asking them to do that with me. I mean, if they were electively being like, I want to run this much, I would probably say no, like you shouldn't. But I developed a lot of interesting obsessive tendencies, and running became a coping mechanism for me. And as I reverse engineered my childhood and kind of understood the obsessive compulsiveness that I had, I used to have to, hop on one foot X number of times, flip light switch X numbers of times to make sure my mom didn't die. That was like my biggest thing. I always thought my mom was going to die. And running was like this way that I could just be at peace. Like, I was just would calm my brain, my overactive brain, So I had these extremes. And then in high school, dealing with eating disorders and being super, super skinny and, anorexic, and pulling my hair out at one point in my, when I was in middle school. So I had big bald spots everywhere. So I was always poked fun of. It was just bizarre, right? I mean, you look at, and I blocked a lot of that out of my current life thinking about it, because I'm like, I don't want to be driven or shaped by my past. I don't really think about where I am today. But the fortunate thing with what I do for a living now is I've been fortunate enough to talk with a lot of high performers, people like you, people like Mark, people that have achieved a lot in their athletic careers. And I've realized that more often than not, they usually come from not necessarily similar, but strange times of adversity, weird things they had to overcome. And athletics either became a coping mechanism, a masochistic type thing, some way to inflict pain in a way that they could control. Very similar stories across the board. And I'm like, okay, I'm not as effed up as I thought. There are other people that have had, and it kind of shapes the way to do this. Flash forward to when I was like 19, 20, I went through a period of time when I was in high school. I was independent studies, so it was like a version of homeschool, except I was still part of the school, so I could still participate in school sports. So I ran cross country, track, and played rugby. Rugby was a club sport, but anyhow, so it was great because I would have like some elective classes on campus, but for the most part, I was homeschooled. And I was homeschooled because I was helping my mom out, because she was dealing with a lot of, legal stuff and some sexual abuse and some other stuff that happened. Long story long, I was working full time to help support my mom, help support my family while going to school. So my entire high school period was not a normal high school period. It was spent either focusing on sports and work, or, that was really much it. Like, it was just working a lot. So by the time I was like 19, 20, I was trying to bulk up. I was playing rugby. I really enjoyed rugby. I played winger. So I was always the faster guy. As a guy, in the outside. But I wanted to get bigger because I broke a few ribs playing rugby because I was pretty small. I'm like, I gotta get bigger. So I went through a couple of years where I really just tried to put on mass, and I wanted to get bigger. And I did kind of fall in love with bodybuilding to a certain degree. But with that came kind of force feeding myself for a while. And then to a point where, flash forward, get into, more of a corporate setting. I was in a commission only job for a while. And I'm glazing over a lot of detail to just get to the point. I ended up at, close to 300 pounds at my heaviest, because I was still eating like I was bulking, but wasn't really even training anymore. I was just stressed out trying to make money with a commission-only job. And I could analyze it until I'm blue in the face, like why I did it, but it's wild. So I went from one extreme to a complete other extreme.
And I guess there's an act of rebellion, I guess, because it sounds like you were forced to grow up quickly and had, sort of this maybe out of balance pushing and challenging yourself to run a marathon at age 11. And I guess the counterbalance to that would be to sit around and deliberately eat too much and disregard your health that was taken to such extreme that was perhaps unhealthy before. So maybe the opponent process reaction, Dr. Anna Lemke, Dopamine Nation. Like we always go on flip the seesaw, and I don't know if that was part of it, but
it definitely feels like it is. Like in retrospect, it does. Like I can't help but think that it was some element of self-sabotage. Like as someone that is seemingly healthy and was athletic, for them to completely flip it like that and not even recognize it as wrong. It's like, I had to have known this was not a healthy way to go, right? I mean,
Sure.
I gained over 100 pounds in like a year and a half. Like I just blew up.
And do you do that from eating shit food? I mean, you can't overeat natural, nutritious meals and do that.
I wasn't doing that on, fruit and chicken breast. No, it was like I've talked about a lot. Probably people have probably heard it, but my Jack in the Box taco addiction, like that was like my jam. It was like 6 to 8 Jack in the Box tacos. You had them 2 for 99 cents, and that was just like that was something that was my post workout when I was running, and it was something that was my pregame when I was just overweight. So it's like a recurring. So people joke with me about it. Be like, if you see Thomas in like a Jack in the Box drive-through, he's resorting back to old habits.
Maybe a new sponsor for your channel.
It would be awesome.
Jack in a Box and Butcher Box, both supply 20% discount with this code. No.
I'm going to do that just to mess with people and see what they do.
Jack in the Butcher Box. Oops, excuse me. Yeah. So how you took a very short time and just started piling on this weight. And I mean, what was the thought process?
I just wanted to focus on making money and career.
Yeah.
That was really it. So it was like I was still eating like I was training and focusing more on, it was commission only at the time. So for me, it was like I had to be pretty focused. I was pretty stressed. I was drinking like 8 Monster Energy drinks a day. It was just ridiculous. Like I was getting like what was that? Like 600 milligrams of caffeine or more than that, 600 to 800 milligrams of caffeine, depending on which one you get.
Yeah.
So it was just unreal, just tremendously unhealthy, but I was made of rubber and magic, as Chris Williamson would say. You don't really think about that stuff. So
I guess it was kind of a creeping, it's not the front of your awareness. The front of your awareness is the job. And then you kind of wake up one day and see that you're maybe 50 pounds over, or you need a new suit, or like, how does that work?
Yeah. I mean, fortunately enough, I was never in a situation except for a couple spots where I was having to like suit it and boot it, or, really be black tie. So, I knew it was definitely not like this thing where, oh my gosh, my clothes don't fit anymore. For me, for the first 6 months or so, I always liken it to that episode of South Park with like Eric Cartman and Beefcake. Remember that episode where he's
I don't know if I know the exact episode.
So basically he's trying to bulk up, so he buys Weight Gainer 5000 and he just becomes morbidly obese. But he's just like, I'm jacked. I'm so jacked. And he's just like piling these like 10,000 calorie drinks together, and he's just like, I'm gonna get yoked, and he just
so true to life. Jesus.
That was me. I was just like, I'm buff. And like, I mean, granted, like I put on muscle, don't get me wrong. Like, I mean, between like around my senior year, I still put on like good amount of muscle because I was trying to. And then after that, it was like, what was 5 days a week of resistance training turned to 3, turned to 2, turned to 1, turned to hopping in the gym when I could, but still eating like that.
Yeah.
And it just became, my focus was very myopic on making money and that.
And then you hit a breaking point or something, I suppose, with your physical health as well as your career path. Yeah.
So I was definitely diagnosed type 2 diabetic. That happened quick.
So you turned yourself into a diabetic
in 2 years.
Thanks to Jack in a Box. Oh, shoot, we just lost a potential sponsor.
Dang it.
In 2 years.
Yeah.
So prior to that, you probably had excellent metabolic health as a young athlete.
I mean, I never really checked it, right? So, I mean, arguably, could I have been type 2 diabetic when I was thin? I guess it's possible, but I doubt it, So my fasting glucose was 144 when I was, super overweight. So I remember them giving me the whole like spiel, the speech on, you're diabetic, to avoid this. Whoa.
Yeah.
Look at that's what happens.
And it's going to bust the lid off my...
So with that, it was just one of those... It wasn't really my call to action. Like I didn't really care. Like I was just like, okay, cool. Like
so it didn't hit.
No,
it didn't scare the crap out of you. Yeah.
Talked about what was funny is like I always say I was almost driven by shame, because what happened was I was literally at Jack in the Box. I had driven through the drive-through, and I was sitting in the stall next to the drive-through, and I was eating Jack in the Box tacos like I would do like a couple times a week at least. And a buddy of mine or acquaintance of mine drove by, saw me eating tacos, and he just waved at me. And that's what's so funny about the story that I've talked about a lot, is that it wasn't a close friend. It wasn't like he drove by and was like, gotcha. He drove by and was like, hey, there's Tom eating tacos, because that's what Thomas probably does. Look at him, you know? And there was that moment where there was an element of shame, and I'm just like, dude, this is the dude that I am.
Yeah.
Right? This is Thomas, and this is what people see me as. And like the look in his face, the fact that it was so nonchalant and so just easy, that was my turning point. And people always laugh. They're like, well, you don't have like a crazy call to action? Like no one told you were going to die? Like, no, I was early 20s. Like no one was going to tell me I was about to die. Like they were just like, wow, what's going to happen to Thomas? Like Thomas needs to do something. I remember my sister being super concerned. I remember my family just being like, dude, what do we do about Thomas? And me being like, nothing's wrong. You know, I'm just buff. And like,
so my Cartman's friend.
Yeah. So that dude driving by, like, and just like, I think back to that green 4Runner, like it's just like drilled in my head that day, just green 4Runner driving by, like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
So it was at that moment, I finished my tacos, but it was after I finished my tacos where I'm like, okay, this is how people see me. And I've always been a people pleaser, which was to my detriment. But that moment, that saved my life. Like who knows where I would be if it wasn't for that little moment where there is enough shame for me to make a decision that I didn't want to be that person anymore. So it was like pretty much the next day I started changing things. You know, I still went on for a little while, but it was, you know, really over the next month, like my entire life changed.
It just didn't feel the same when you chowed those tacos.
No,
it just wasn't
like,
as
who's
enjoyable.
gonna see me?
I wonder if it, you know, exposed like this distinction between, you know, maybe deep down you had this identity as an athlete, and there you were living incongruent with it. And so that drive-by wave at the person, maybe inside is screaming out, wait, I'm an exceptional long-distance endurance athlete and rugby player. You don't understand. I'm just covered up with, you know, all these layers. And, you know, James Clear talks about that, Atomic Habits, like when you want to change something, you form that identity and call yourself a healthy, fit person, and that will help you align with the goal rather than just saying, I got to exercise more.
Yeah.
You have to own the identity. And it sounded like the identity was formed in younger years, and you just kind of went off track. You just had to turn the wheel back.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. I mean, there was,
as we go deeper into the
well, I mean, my identity was wrapped up in being an athlete from the time I was, you know, earlier than 6.
Right.
I didn't get mom's love unless I was an athlete, right? So for me, not only living incongruent with my actual self or my authentic self as like an inherent athlete, living incongruently with what would actually achieve love and affection and validation for me. I was like a rogue, right? So it was like, and I felt rebellion and I felt rogue out of that. And that was empowering as a young man. But that's completely something that would just break you as you get older. You can only sustain that for so long. It's like, I'm doing this in spite, subconscious spite.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, I think it's an important recalibration, because it is a lousy way to receive love, attention, connection. You know, it's like someone driving around with expensive consumption and toys to get that attention. It's kind of a bullshit way to get attention. It's not real. And so
like my rental Mercedes that's out in the parking lot right now.
You know,
but, not my 250,000 mile truck with a smashed windshield that I normally drive.
So, you know, this was kind of a, you know, less than optimal way to receive love and support. Then you had to throw the shit into the fan and say, forget that. Now that that's out of your system, I guess that was associated with the drive-by, like, okay, I'm done playing this game too, or something. And now you're going to come back to a healthy middle ground. Yeah.
I mean, and you know, can we ask the same question about what I do for a living now? Like, am I repeating a cycle in a different category? Right.
How so?
Well, think about it. I mean, like, I ask myself this is somewhat rhetorical, but I mean, like, I don't seek attention from what I do, but am I subconsciously, like, do I just want to like pump out content and do this because, like, is this just, am I going to live a life of repeating this cycle in different directions?
Yeah.
And that's where the inner work really needs to be done. And that's where I'm trying to work, is like, what is the core of my being and what is my true authentic self? And what are these coping mechanisms? My coping mechanisms always come back to extremes. And you can only have a couple of extremes, arguably just one extreme, because there's only enough time, right?
Hey, and like, he's extreme in every way. Wait, excuse me?
Well, it's like, dude,
doesn't make sense. Yeah.
When I was like overweight, I was addicted to benzos too. Like, I was popping Xanax and Valium, and it was like freaking Skittles, man. And it was so bad. And it was like extreme again. Like, am I trying to numb pain? Am I trying to like, I don't know. What is this? And I've always joked that if I wasn't into athletics, I probably would have gotten into drugs and I'm sure, and I've talked to a lot of athletes that are the same way. They're like, no, and they're safe to say like, this is my addiction. And that's where I have big problems with some of what is this common theme that's out there that's saying like, you shouldn't be addicted to your exercise. You shouldn't be like, I get it, but unless you fix the root problem, that addiction is a much better addiction than what their alternative addiction would be. So be careful what you tell people, because people that are not athletes and not athletic minded can't relate to that because they haven't been there. So they're like, you're addicted. That's sick. That's sick that you do that. That's sick that you run yourself into the ground like that. Well, hey, if I wasn't doing this, like, I don't know if this can just get neutralized without a lot of years of work. So don't tell me to just stop doing something that is actually a much better alternative than me popping 5 milligrams of Xanax per day. You know, you get what I'm saying?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I think we're all on that path to enlightenment. And I can reference like my time as, you know, an elite, high training athlete. That was my, you know, life and death every day. And it, you know, it certainly was better for me to evolve to the next level of I'm completely immersed in the process of personal growth, and I have not attached my self-esteem to the outcome. But I can't start there because at first I want to get recognized by the girls in high school. So I'm running myself around the track in circles until I puke. Of course, I was doing it for egotistical and superficial reasons. And then you can climb the staircase again, and you know, explore deeper meaning in your fitness pursuits rather than looking good. But at first, if you just want to look good, welcome to the gym and let's get some work done, you know? And I think that's kind of, it's nice to think about climbing those staircases, because I think the greatest athletes, a lot of them are messed up and imbalanced. And there's a lot of talk about Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods going, you know, not necessarily wanting to repeat those paths, but I like to look for examples of people like Kipchoge, the great Kenyan marathoner, the greatest runner of all time, long distance runner. And his quotes, if you look on Google, Kipchoge quotes, he is such a wise man. And he comes up with these aphorisms that are just, it shows that you can perform at the highest level ever and be really evolved and being all about the right things that make you, you know, for a rich and meaningful life, win or lose. He said, only the disciplined ones in life are free. Otherwise, you're a slave to your whims and passions. Okay. How did you figure that one out, dude? That's beautiful, you know? And he figured it out by running 130 miles per week at high altitude and crushing the competition in 16 major marathons. He's 15-2 or something like that. But yeah, it takes a long time to get there. So don't knock people who are somewhere along the way on the journey. You know?
Yeah, well, it's very, you know, that sometimes it's just again, there's a season for everything. And like you look at you could easily take a look at the divorced male, right? A 45, 50-year-old divorced male that goes through a pretty aggressive existential crisis because his entire life has been flipped upside down. And like a lot of times those guys go one of two routes. They go into the drug partying route or they go hardcore into their fitness. And I see it from my perspective as sort of what I call the peanut gallery with my channel, right? Like I see a large body of people and I hear it all. And I see that happen, you know, with a largely male audience on YouTube. I see that because a lot of that middle-aged, like I just got to get myself in action. I got to take care of myself. I get myself in shape. And a small percentage of them do it healthy. A large percentage go to the extreme. But it's keeping them from going out and slamming alcohol and doing other things. And I'm like, we got to be careful how we talk to this, because like athletics as a tool, and even sometimes an extreme tool, which I think we need to understand how to modulate that, but it could be what saves people's lives too. So again, I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm just saying that people need to be careful to shit on that too much, because like how someone's coping is how someone's coping, and they don't need rescuing if they're running 80 miles a week. I mean, they're going to figure it out. They're going to figure it out that maybe isn't sustainable.
Or eating like a freak, or, you know, fill in the example. There's so many different, you know, biohacking their brains out to the consternation of their neighbors. Like it's all good, man.
Sorry, Marty and Mindy.
Yeah. So you had the Pathfinder drive by, and then the
Forerunner.
recalibration started. The Forerunner, excuse me. Lost another sponsor by misidentifying the car.
Nissan.
And so how did that work? You said you still went back to Taco Bell a little bit, didn't taste quite
Jack
as
in the Box, dude.
fantastic. Jack in the Box, and then went off to...
I went to Jack in the Box one more time after that. Well, I mean, I've been back since, like, to get an iced tea and stuff like that.
Take pictures, film a video outside.
Yeah, I need to.
Like Paul Saladino crashing all the different stores. Yeah.
Oh, Paul.
So wasn't it an extreme recalibration where all of a sudden you started slamming
what
CrossFit,
it was,
you know?
I actually took some time and I did what I knew best for a little bit. For a couple of months, I went to, okay, that's funny story. Table that, because that does come into the equation, the running. But no, I went back to like eating like 6-7 meals per day, trying to weigh out my food and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it didn't work for me anymore. Something was going on. Like, it really wasn't working. Because every time that I would put food in my mouth, I wanted to eat more. So the more opportunities I had to eat at that metabolically deranged state was actually catastrophic for me. And there were two docs that I worked with in my world, in the corporate healthcare world. So we were at the time an ancillary lab services company. So what we really did is we provided like cortisol testing, salivary testing, early mRNA stuff to different private practices. So I was a salesperson. So my role was really selling biotech stuff, selling like early lab tests. So anyway, point is, we had a slew of doctors, right? So all these different docs, there are a few of them that were really close friends, and two of them in particular were like, like, there's this thing called intermittent fasting that, like, we've had success with a lot of patients with. And, it sounds like it might just be something that works for you. And it wasn't like a push. It was like, these are dudes that had patients that were diabetic that did it. And this was before it was ever trendy. Like, so it was like, I'll try it. Dude, the weight fell off with it. And like, that's the thing, is like, I can't make that shit up. Like, it's just, I did do other things and the weight just fell off with it. And I don't think it's because it was magical. I think it's because it worked with the hardwiring of my operating system. I was a very black and white type on-off person. Yeah. So for me, it worked for me because it was like, I didn't give two craps about the longevity aspect or anything. For me, it was like black, white, eating, not eating, not eating. And for me to go like 16, 18 hours just not eating wasn't all that hard. And just by default, I wasn't able to eat as much during my day. So I lost a lot of weight. I lost 50 pounds in the first 2.5 months or so, like 3 months. Yeah. So it was like, or just about 3 months. So it was pretty aggressive. And then it slowed down after that. So, and then, I got to a point, I was doing it every day. I was doing it too much. Don't get me wrong. I was fasting too much. But in retrospect, at the time, I was like, but then again, it's like, you look at the data and losing weight fast versus losing weight slow, like really no real difference as long as you are taking into account what happens to your metabolic rate and your lean body mass. I had a decent amount of lean body mass because I did my Eric Cartman bulk before. So, I had muscle. Yeah. I worked really hard at a heavy weight. So by the time then it brings us into the running thing that you mentioned. Yeah, I remember being like, probably 260, maybe 270, and just like being like, well, fuck it, I'm going to go out for a run.
Where's them running shoes in the closet? Give me those running shoes,
I remember schlepping my way through 6 miles. Ooh. And I just did it. I did it.
Did
it was
you get
ugly.
All rashed out on your thighs?
No, rashed out. No, I just hurt. I remember my feet hurting, I'd never been... Yeah. But it wasn't as bad as you would have thought, but it probably looked hilarious. Like, I looked like a middle lineman, just like, what is that guy doing? And he just kept going because that was the one thing I knew, So I did go back to running, but it hurt too much to keep going. But the point is that it did come back.
How do you lose 50 pounds in 3 months? Are we talking about 10 or 15 pounds of inflammation, water retention or something?
We got to be real here. Like, how much of that was water? And a lot of times when people start fasting, it's not uncommon for them to lose, 10 pounds of water pretty quick.
So an obese person who's, going onto their protocol, generally they're walking around with way more water fluid retention than someone who's fit and healthy. How does that work?
Yeah, it depends. I think people have this common misconception that inflammation automatically just means water. Inflammation, yes, that can certainly cause water to retain edema. But inflammation is really, more systemic, obviously inflammatory immune system response. So when you say inflammation, it's like, I almost encourage people to think of inflammation more so as like taking a balloon and your normal function is it's filled up with air. Yeah. When you're inflamed, you have the same size balloon, but with twice as much air. It's like, think of everything as tight and think of it. That's like a good analogy to explain it. It's not like you just become quote unquote inflamed.
Yeah.
There's such a difference between acute inflammation that might happen when you know, because that's got a whole different level of cyclooxygenase, and my hamstring just cramped from those deadlifts. So I guess I need some water. But anyhow, the point is that, you know, inflammation is a little bit different from what we think in terms as the mainstream. So the common person, usually, like if they're a bigger person and all of a sudden they dramatically cut calories, usually they're just losing glycogen too. And you've got to remember, for every 3.7 grams of water for every 1 gram of carbohydrates. So when you start reducing calories by default, you're usually reducing your carbohydrates too. So my sister's a perfect example. She just started doing keto and she was like 118 pounds and she's down to like 107, you know, in like 2 weeks. I'm like, you need to, like, that's too much. Like, you're too lean at 5'6". Like, point is like, I know she didn't lose that much fat in 2 weeks.
Right.
So the water, the glycogen,
is a larger person able to store more glycogen? Is it a function of total muscle mass? I mean, the glycogen is stored in the muscles in the liver, so there's not. I mean, you know, lean, mean Dave Scott Ironman is storing 500 grams of glycogen, supposedly more than the average person because of training.
Yeah.
So,
well, training can increase the rate of glycogen resynthesis. Thereby, in a shorter amount of time, you can store more.
Yeah.
So, because you got to think of it's turnover, you know, right? So there's always a turnover with glycogen. So my theory behind this is that, because it's very interesting that a very small person with not a ton of muscle mass can still hold a lot. The question is like, does the normal person never get a chance to like fully saturate the way that a leaner person that's training hard does? If their rate of glycogen resynthesis is higher, can they restore faster as far as like the capability of S-GLUT1 and GLUT5 and being able to pull fructose and glucose into the liver and glucose into the muscle? Arguably, maybe they're able to restore faster before turnover starts again, whereas a regular person that's not training can only restore so much before they're going back to depleting again. So they're never. So it's like the rate of repletion is so much faster in an athlete. They store more, but really they're just repleting faster and more efficiently. That's my theory. Don't know if it's accurate or not, but it makes a lot of sense.
We'll test it out on some Olympic athletes of some country if they want to participate.
Yeah. But to answer your question though, an overweight person, typically, if they've been overweight for a long time, they carry a fair amount of lean body mass in their legs. And you can see that with DEXAs. Like when you look at morbidly obese, especially, you know, if they've been on their feet too, it's pretty common to see a fair amount of lean body mass like in their lower extremities.
Okay, you got that going for you. So, that's cool.
Yeah. So which
You've
is great.
been weight training every day.
Yeah. So it's like, then all of a sudden, you know, you drop glycogen, whatever. I mean, I just don't really have an answer. I mean,
you drop muscle mass, you drop glycogen, you drop some
fat,
fluid retention. And fat, and it can get up to 50 pounds in
a few months. I mean, that's 3 months. I mean, that's not completely unrealistic. You see that happen. And then it slowed down aggressively after that, which tells me that, there was a lot of just that initial sort of, you know, the whoosh, right? Call it the whoosh effect.
And so you still had a goal, I suppose, of losing more. You were just kind of...
I just didn't want to be that guy anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really
And then start working out more, I suppose, and all that.
My goal when I got down to about maybe like 215 pounds or so is when I kind of joked with my wife about trying to get on some magazine covers. That's where it all kind of started. And my wife actually was the one. I've always been a sort of a self-deprecating prick. Like I always just like, I'm like really critical of myself and rather cynical sometimes. And I was joking with my wife about like, what if I could get on some magazine covers? You know, like I've got some good muscle underneath me. I'm not huge, but like, and she's just like, yeah, you could. Like, what? She's like, yeah, you should go for it. And she was like, I bet you, she's like, I bet you won't do it. It was more like that. So she was like, I bet you won't put yourself out there to do it because I know you can. My wife has always been like eternally like hopeful and eternally optimistic for me. For herself, she's an interesting cat because we're both two very self-deprecating people that if we were like, we would just like, oh, like we're terrible. Like we're horrible people. Like,
together though, you're awesome parents.
Yeah. So it's like we feed each other because like, I'm like, hey babe, I suck, but you're awesome. And she's like, I suck, but you're awesome. Like, well, great.
It's nice little checks and balances.
So it was like, okay, screw it. Like I'll try. One thing that made me different branching into that world, the fitness industry, was that I'm like, I've got a cool story, but I knew how to reach out to people, whereas like the fitness industry was full of a bunch of people that really just didn't know the business side if it bit them in the ass. Whereas like, I'm like, the ticket to getting on the cover of a magazine isn't to like walk in there being the most ripped person. It's to email the editors with my story.
Right.
And like, so I'm like, I'm going on LinkedIn, I'm finding the editors of Muscle and Fitness and this, and I'm emailing them being like, hey, look at this. Hey, here's my story. I lost a bunch of weight, corporate guy, like getting into fitness much more now. Here's some before and afters, you know, and like a lot, you know, out of, I can't tell you exactly how many, but let's say out of 10, I know 2 emailed me back. 2 emailed back and were like, hey man, like this is a first, like someone's reaching out to us.
Wow.
You know, we'll keep you posted if something pops up.
The other guys are too cool to reach out. They know where I work out. They can find me there. Yeah.
Well, so no one was like immediately like, hey, yes, you get a cover.
Yeah.
But I guess it was like another, like maybe month or so later, like Muscle and Performance Magazine reached out to me and they were like, hey, Robert Reef is shooting a cover. Or shooting, he didn't say cover first. They said, is shooting for Muscle and Performance Magazine. The person that was going to be shooting with them had to cancel. Are you interested? And
the stars align.
I'm like, yeah.
Hell yeah.
And I remember like my dad was pretty close to dying at this point of cancer. And I remember calling him and like talking to him, like, Dad, like I'm getting my first, you know, like magazine shoot. And my dad was in the publishing business. So like he was just like super proud from like a book and magazine aspect. This is cool for him. And then I show up there and Robert Reef, super cool dude, very well-known photographer in the fitness industry, super esteemed. Like he's like one of the go-to. Him and Per Bernal are like the two that shoot almost all the covers. I'm like, hey, Mr. Reef, nice to meet you. He goes, hey man, you look great. Don't want to like shock you or anything, but we're shooting the cover. And I was like, whoa. I was like, cool. And he's like, man, your story's awesome. He's like, I heard about your story. This is awesome. And we shot the feature and then shot the cover. And yeah, man, like I guess, you know, a month later, so that magazine came out. And then I was like, my marketing brain turned on and I was just like, I was out of the corporate world. I had taken like a little exit from that because I was sick of it. I just didn't want to do it anymore. After I started losing weight and stuff, I'm like, this is not the world I want to live in. So I was actually in like a sabbatical at that point. And I was like, I got to do something with this. I was like, I'm going to like start posting on social media with just some, like, not really knowing what I was doing. Then some, you know, social media kind of caught fire along with the mainstream media. Once that cover released, I got more covers and I ended up shooting a bunch of covers over the span of the next year or so. So with that, it was like my career kind of started as like fat corporate guy gone fitness cover model. But I quickly realized that like the fitness industry and being a model is not where I wanted to live. Like I had enough business acumen to know that I was never going to make. You want to know how much money I made for that first cover?
$800, $250,
yeah,
$1,000,
yeah, $1,000, and then I shot some other covers where I got like 500. Like, you
That's
don't make
usually it's nothing.
Yeah, you don't make money doing that.
Yeah,
so
triathlon covers. I haven't got a check yet.
Yeah, I think they paid me because they felt bad.
It's a privilege to be on the cover.
Yeah,
I mean you better work that for yourself. Yeah,
exactly. That's the thing. It's like, okay, so that was the advice that Robert gave me. And Alex, who was the editor-in-chief at the time for Muscle and Performance, was like, you're a smart guy. Just so you know, like your job is to leverage this. Yeah. And I was like, well, I know what I'm good at. I was like, I have a biochemistry background with what I did. And I was like, I can talk about my transformation. Let me talk about what I did. So like, I started posting those pictures, talking about it. I wrote a little crappy PDF ebook. And man, that thing, we like peddled some random Facebook traffic at it just because that was back in the day, 2014, 15, when Facebook traffic actually, it was actually affordable, you know? And like, so I'm like, I'm just going to test it out. And like, it was profitable on day one, just with an ebook of what I did. Like it was my story and what I did. And it was like a natural process from there. I started kind of doing some like little videos, selfie videos, being like explaining like, hey, here's why I did this. Yeah. And a lot of people were commenting like, you're really good at explaining this stuff. You're really good at explaining it. Okay, cool. So I started filming some videos, had my wife set up the camera on a little tripod, put them up on YouTube. And they were getting traction. And the rest is kind of history. And from there, I was like, I've actually got something here. Like what I'm good at is explaining stuff and I think people can resonate with my story. And that was it.
So on the day of this cover shoot, I have this maybe a flawed notion about the bodybuilding scene where you show up to the studio dehydrated for 36 hours or you've jammed in a bunch of glucose to blow up your veins or like what's behind that? Like how different do you look on a day-to-day basis versus cover day?
That's a good question. So this first cover...
I mean, I saw you this morning. He looks the same all the time and he's a legitimate performer. So it's not like, you know, it's not faked in that way. but is it embellished, or is Photoshop coming in after the?
It's embellished. You know, for the sake, like it is, and I don't know if it's like we have one camera up right now, but like I'll show it so you can see, like, you know, I've got these big ugly stretch marks, right, from when I was overweight.
Oh.
And I remember them being like, yeah, we're gonna have to airbrush you.
You have to get rid of those.
And I was kind of like, even me at that stage was still sort of like, why? Just leave them. You know,
don't do it.
Like, you know, I just didn't care. And they're like, well, you got to understand this is the fitness industry. And I'm like, well,
what about it?
Like,
yeah.
this is
Jeez,
like people that are picking these up are people that like want to look just like you. And it's like, I thought something was kind of wrong with that, honestly, fundamentally. Like I understood from a business perspective. I was like, yeah, you want to craft the perfect physique. But that's exactly what was fucking wrong. And I was just like, that's annoying. And I remember, I'm not going to say his name, but his first name starts with P and his last name starts with L. And anyone that maybe will know him, I don't know, wouldn't photograph me because he's like too much work in Photoshop. Like he's too much work in Photoshop. And I'm just like, what the fuck, guys? Like I worked my ass off, and I'm like, so anyway, that first shoot, I didn't really know what I was doing a whole lot. I knew how to prep, and I remember like, you know, I knew how to kind of cut water a little bit.
Yeah.
I wrestled a little bit.
Oh, right.
So I understood how to cut water. So I did some of that, dehydrated myself. But it's funny because if you look at like the pictures of like my first cover to like my last cover, you can tell like I was a lot softer. Like I didn't, you know, my first cover. But then shooting back to back covers over the course of the year, not gonna lie, like for some of those covers, like I'm lean. People that know me know that I stay like sub 6-ish% year round. But yeah, I did have to kind of abuse diuretics a little bit. And that's something that I say abuse because I think any use of them outside of a clinical use is abuse. Like it's not like I was pounding them, but like to prep for shoots, I would pop a couple diuretics. I would pop some Diazide to drop the water for a shoot. And so people should know that, like when you look at a magazine cover, those guys are legitimately work hard. It's not like you can't diuretic your way out of fat, but you can diuretic, you know, you got to get dry.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend doing it because I think my kidneys paid a price for it. It's not healthy stuff. But when you're going back to back cover shoots like that, like it's the only way that you can perform. And you show up to a shoot and you're not, it's all the things that are wrong. And I'm just being real here. Like not that I'm proud of taking diuretics with that, but
on just the grand scheme, as we talked about earlier, you know, with the massive corporate corruption and all these problems in life, and then we're spending all our time and energy criticizing Liver King for not telling everybody about his PED use. Come on, you know, like, of course there's going to be optimizations involved in a Hollywood type of scene, you know.
Yeah, dude, it's you know. So you'd sodium deplete, and then you'd sodium reload right before. Typical bodybuilding type prep stuff. You know, very similar stuff bodybuilders would do, except you know there was a period there, I think for like 2 months, where I was filming or shooting either a magazine feature or a cover every week for like 8 weeks. You can't maintain that level of sodium depletion
anymore. Yeah, right.
So you just have no choice but you got to pop a diuretic. You got to drop the water because every time you take a diuretic or every time you sodium deplete and replete, you rebound. So like so even if diuretics aside, if I were to cut sodium 2 days prior and then reintroduce sodium the night before to draw water in a hydrophilic state into you know the muscle to fill back up, you'd still remain dry. But then what happens is the next day you rebound really bad with sodium. So you get real puffy. And which again, by most standards, you'd look great, but you would be like not cover worthy. And so then what happens is then you retain water for 3-4 days. But if you're shooting, then I got to shoot again in 5 days. So take another diuretic, drop the water. So it all becomes just a water manipulation game. And that's what I think people need to understand, that there's no such thing that I know of as like a fitness cover shoot that doesn't involve some kind of water manipulation. Like, so it's a very unhealthy thing. And if I got asked to go do a cover now, I definitely wouldn't do diuretics. Yeah.
Just do one a year or something.
Not even then, like it's just they're terrible. Like they're so unhealthy. Like they're the worst.
It's funny.
They're way worse than probably a lot of other things that are demonized way more. You know, I think it's like the damage you can do with diuretics is very real.
Yeah. So then, I guess, tell us about your operation a little bit. If people have not gone over to YouTube, they will now after watching the interview. But now you have a really smooth machine in place where you're posting up a lot of content, and it's, I guess you call yourself the interpreter of complex scientific information. Is that kind of where?
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I call myself sort of a translator. Yeah. You know, I'm very careful not to call myself an expert, even though like I would consider myself having expert knowledge in a lot of fields. I don't really want to be people's expert. I really want to be the person that they can trust to articulate the information. And that means, I do talk about where I stand, but I'm also very clear. Like, I'm okay with having, vegan experts come on my channel and let them and teach me on why they think certain things, or carnivore on another side. And I just be like, okay, well, here's what I do, because I know what makes me perform well. And, people naturally will probably want to gravitate towards what I do because they say, oh, you look good, you perform good. Like, clearly what you're doing is working. Okay, sure. But I'm not going to call my way the expert way. That's the way I roll. But yeah, I've got a pretty smooth machine where I, know how to produce content, know how to curate it properly, and, have built a really nice team that allows us to do it efficiently.
I think, as far as expertise and credibility, being able to complete that 21-minute workout with that amount of weight on the bar and do all the fitness endeavors that you do, I think is, it probably needs to be respected and appreciated more these days as we see this trend of kind of science taking over and snuffing out peak performance. Yeah. And so coming to it, my only expertise is as an athletic background. So I was expert at beating other guys in the race, but I don't have a scientific degree on whatever, but whatever the top athletes are doing are working by definition if you care about performance standard. And so if you're living and breathing this extremely fit lifestyle, that is a form of expertise that I believe is equal to or greater than someone who's got a PhD in exercise physiology or what have you.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. And we also have to remember that most of the time when someone has a PhD, it's in an exceptionally narrow scope. And most reputable people in the academic world are very open about that. They're like, okay, I'm an expert in PPAR alpha and nuclear receptor proteins and how a fatty acid will affect nuclear receptor proteins to ultimately make this cell mitochondria utilize fat more efficiently, like the most narrow thing. And they will be the first to tell you, oh, but if you ask me to talk to another human or you ask me to talk to a girl, it's never going to happen. Yeah. So a lot of times they have very little social and they're very open about it. They joke about that, right? Yeah. Like but the point is that they're not typically experts in like the full spectrum, right? And very seldom do you find those that put in the work too. As far as like athletically, it's you can really the few of them. There's not a lot of them. I do, like Andrew Huberman really does put in work. I've seen him work. I've seen him work hard. It's like he actually does bust his ass. It's like, so, and say what you want about him, whether you like him or not. Like I acknowledge people that work hard. Jim Stepani, another PhD that works hard. Yeah. Lane Norton, whether you like him or not, the dude works hard.
D'Agostino, Mark Bell, Mark Sisson, Peter Attia swam from Catalina to shore. Yeah. So if you don't agree with his scientific point of view, the mofo still swam from Catalina to shore, and that's huge credibility. Yeah. Yeah. And to me,
I think that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like we live in this world where we just want to optimize. So everyone wants to say like, well, who's giving me the coolest information that I can use to optimize myself? And be careful who you listen to, because and I will say like, steroids are not with some of these people. I wish that there was just more transparency with it in some ways, but a lot of them, like a lot of those fuckers still work damn hard. So still respect them within their right, but just understand that there's different layers, and that's just a completely different discussion. But the point is that listen to people that really do walk the walk. That's the bottom line. And walk the walk means being transparent. It means actually doing the work. And it means sharing the information with like true compassion and true desire to help rather than tooting your own horn.
Ooh, that's a 3-step process there. That Thomas's high standard. I love those. I love that.
It's
all those
not
aspects
that high.
are
it's
important.
Just called being a real fucking human.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's important because we misinterpret so much stuff, especially the general public. Barry Bonds, he cheated and Babe Ruth was better because he took steroids. He hit 73 home runs out of the ballpark. Do you want to stand in front of a pitching machine of a 100-mile-per-hour pitch and try to hit it? It's like, he's an amazing athlete. Lance Armstrong's one of the greatest endurance athletes of all time, the greatest cyclist of all time. And he beat 198 guys who were doped off their ass on the same stuff as he. Yeah. And I think that's important to put out there you get me going on this subject because it's super interesting. And we'll talk more about where, the different nuances, but I'll mention in Lance's case, like if the sport were clean, if cycling were clean, he would have won by 20 minutes because he was a genetically superior and trained harder and was more focused and had a better team. Instead of winning by 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 7 minutes, he would have destroyed everybody. But I think doping levels the playing field for those who don't have the genetic particulars that might make them rip city the first day they walk in the gym and so forth.
It's a solid point. I mean, definitely with that, especially in endurance world, like the use of EPO and the use of like all of that is, like, I think people have a misunderstanding of specifically how that works. Like EPO is a great example of just that really is just leveling the playing field, because that's something that genetically you're going to be predisposed to being able to have better oxygen carrying capacity or not. There's a certain level of genetics that comes into that.
Yeah, the Sherpas in Nepal have hematocrit of 58
and
all that.
Dude, so it's an interesting one, and it's difficult because I think deep down people just want to feel like people are being authentic.
Yeah.
And they feel they take it personally. They feel really hurt when they find out, and they also feel like they've been lied to, and it puts them on a
puts them on lawsuit, Liver King's case, and whatnot.
It's just tough because like there's not an understanding of how that works in the world of professional sports, and certain people get put on blast and it makes it sound like not everyone's doing it. Where in the world of like cycling.
Put on blast.
Well, and like with bodybuilding and stuff, that world is weird because like it's like expected, but still taboo, in that world. Yeah. With cycling, I think there's a lot of people that still believe only a small percentage of people ever blood dope or do. And it's like, I mean, better than me. It's probably a lot, right?
I guess nobody knows. And even now, like when I see the performances in triathlon, which is widely considered to be a clean sport. And this one guy got busted who was winning some good races, and the amount of savagery from his peers, from the top triathletes on social media, it was really compelling to me, because if you're cheating and trying to get away with it, you're not going to blast the guy who cheated so badly and flame him. So it makes me think Lionel Sanders wrote this thing like, this motherfucker was in my room. We trained together. Was he shooting up? Was he breaking the law in my house? That guy now seems to me, I feel like they possibly are clean, and they're just, a guy who cheats in a clean sport, or a girl, that's the biggest disgrace I can even imagine, especially in athletics where it's so raw and pure and honest. But if you're reading Tyler Hamilton's book about the cycling scene, he talks about how they're compelled to cheat or go home. You have three choices: cheat and compete, go home, or race clean, get your ass kicked and bitch and moan all day for no one listening, and you're a poor sport because, I'm losing to these guys are all doping. It's a really bad scene.
It's a bad cycle. And well, I guess that's what I mean by with the bodybuilding world. That world is so weird because there's nothing like it's a very subjective sport anyway. Like you're based upon like, okay, your biceps look a certain way. And like, I guess in that sport, it's like in bodybuilding, who really cares if they're doing it? Like, it's just like they're all going to do it to try to grow their quads and do whatever. It's a completely different world. And then I think that's why there's such an outrage when it happens in sports, because it's like, okay, well, although some of these scores are at least in baseball, can be somewhat arbitrary, but with like something like cycling or something like triathlon, it's the clock, dude. Yeah. It's the one dynamic that everybody, whether they are familiar with the sport or not, is going to understand that it's a race to beat the clock, right? Mm-hmm. So it's A plus B equals C, and if you have a supercharger in there and someone else doesn't, that's just not fucking fair. And that makes you be like, that is flat out cheating. So then it's like these lines get so blurred with like the aesthetic world and the performance world. And it's an odd situation. And, I'm glad that we live in a world where people ask questions about it. Like, I feel like people should ask questions, but I think people also need to have like a peek into not everyone, us in the athletic world, like we know this stuff goes on. People that aren't in our world, they see it and it's just like, oh my God. Yeah.
The media helps with the congressman grandstanding and pulling the baseball players into congressional, hearing and all that. It was all grandstanding. Like, what do you guys care about any of this? Why don't you go, and make the world a safer place or something? But in general, everyday use now, it seems like hormone replacement, whatever you want to call it, performance-enhancing drugs are filtering into mainstream use now. And I wonder kind of some of your thoughts and reflections on that from the different sides of the coin.
I feel like there's a normalization of steroids that's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Because you look at like the way it is on YouTube, and like people just openly talk and almost educate on it. So I don't know where I stand. It's like if you've got young, curious, men specifically that are like, I want to get bigger, faster, stronger. Is it better for them to learn it and understand what's going on if they're going to try it anyway? Like if those people that are curious enough to watch those videos and learn, is it better that they learn? I mean, I don't know. I ask myself, is it better that they learn so they do it right and don't hurt themselves? Or is it glorifying it? I'm inclined to think it's actually glorifying it, because sometimes I think it's some level of validation that they need to be like, I'm going to be just fine.
It's not quite the same as sex education, which you might argue, or maybe most listeners would argue, it's probably better to educate your kid about the birds and the bees instead of just send them out and say, just say no,
Yeah, and then you've got the case of like testosterone replacement, which I feel like is something that I don't think anyone should be demonized if they are in a spot where they need it. Like we're so quick to scrutinize men that are in their 40s or 50s that decide to go on TRT, but we won't scrutinize a female that needs to go on thyroid hormone. Like you're manipulating a thyroid hormone, which is still a hormone that drives a lot of things, good and bad, and men are manipulating testosterone. But since testosterone is associated with muscle, it's like really bad. So we're talking testosterone replacement, like a guy going to a doctor and being like, I don't feel like I used to anymore. And I think about it from a father perspective. Like I feel good as a dad, but if my testosterone levels are like in the mid 400s, they're like moderate, low to moderate, and probably just because I trained myself into the ground. But I'm like, if I got to a point where like I was not being the best dad that I could be, and I was not showing up for my kids, and I went to the doctor and my testosterone was like 200 repeatedly, you bet your bottom dollar I would go on TRT if it meant that I could be a better father and have my energy to like maintain. I would absolutely, I have no qualms about doing that whatsoever. And I feel like, because like in a setting like that, I shouldn't say no qualms whatsoever. The qualms that I do have is like, I don't want to be dependent on something. That's what scares me, is knowing the feedback loops and knowing that once you go that route, especially at a certain age, there's no turning back. Like people, I'm sure I'm not an expert in that world too much, but I do feel like, there's ways that you can come back with HCG and things like that. But I think once you get to a certain age and you embark on that, that exogenous hormone is basically shutting down endogenous production.
You get little balls.
Is that the world you want to live on?
Back.
Do you want to be hooked on something that you can't make in your basement, right? So it's like, if testosterone was one of those things where like I could make it at home by brewing botanicals in my saucepan, then I probably would have gone on TRT a long time ago. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, but the fact that I'm like, okay, if I go down this rabbit hole, then that means that I have to accept this, and this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. So I want to make sure that I'm like holding off until I really need it. But I don't think that why should we be upset if regular Bob wants to do it? Like I just don't understand why that's a big deal and why that's demonized. Why is it demonized if someone goes on hormone replacement to be a better human being?
Oh, it's a great point. I feel exactly the same. And like I told Liver King, guess what? You lied. It's a bad thing. You say you're sorry, but you're not in the Olympics. Like those are the athletes that need to apologize and pay their dues. But like, you're on YouTube, you're on Instagram. Who cares? But I got cornered on the Power Project by Mark and Seema and Andrew, and they're like, "Hey, Brad, why don't you take hormone replacement?" "Yeah, Brad, why don't you?" "Yeah, Brad." And I'm like, "I don't know." And I think you expressed it really well, where you want to do the best you can with exhausting all natural strategies to live the most hormone optimized life and stress rest balance and all those things. And so I'm continuing on that path until further notice, and we'll check back here in 3 years time or 5 years time, because when you're doing everything you can and you're losing your edge. And you made a good point there about testosterone. Everyone associates it with like male aggression and muscles and athletic explosiveness, but it transcends all these different areas of life. And Top Dog, the book by Ashley Merriman Poe Bronson, she calls it the social status hormone because it enhances your performance in every area where it's directed. And she gives this firefighter analogy where the fire truck comes to the burning building. The guys jump out of the truck. They get their axes. They chop down the building. They grab the injured person and run out. And they're fully jacked on, male hormone peak performance. And then you go into the paramedic, and they have to calmly chart down the number of cc's of drugs that are going into the IV so they can report to the hospital. And they're in a peak performance state that's characterized by high testosterone. The chess masters who win the tournaments have higher testosterone than their opponents, famous tests that they reference in the book. And so whatever you're directing it toward, if you're a drummer for the rock band, it's all associated with this focusing peak performance social status hormone. And so your dad performance and your ability to engage with long lines at Disneyland and keep your cool and all those things, it's like the male hormone status is kind of a proxy for overall health, longevity, potential, enjoyment of life.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that there's a lot of, and where in that same note, if people are not in a good place, then that testosterone can drive them in a bad direction, right? So it's just like, because maybe they're already an asshole, and then all that does is just make them a bigger asshole because their focus is there. So it's very interesting. And in the case with like Liver King, it's, he wasn't like selling his physique. So he created a character, and I don't think that like, it sucks that happened. And I was disappointed too. Cause like there was a part of me that wanted to be like, could he be natural?
I'm the most gullible guy on the planet. I was convinced he was natural.
Oh, really?
I told Power Project that too, because I have been to that guy's house, and he lives the most authentic and hardcore ancestral lifestyle of anybody, in the cold plunge for 8 minutes at 38 degrees and doing the barbarian workout and eating this incredibly impeccable diet. And I thought, who's doing that? There's no, Matthew Frazier is talking about his Snicker bars in between his sets. He's not like freak about his diet to take every ounce of body fat off. He's in a different realm. And so I thought, yeah, he looks like that because he's completely freaked on every level. I didn't know anything. Same with Lance. I thought Lance was clean because he's such a great athlete that I've known since a young age and was more talented and more driven than anyone else. But it's just like you said at the very start, like it's just kind of a boost upward from all the hard work that you're doing to hit home runs out of the ballpark or set records in on the track or wherever. And that's the part the public doesn't really comprehend well.
Yeah.
And I guess that transitions more to talk about the question of hormone replacement. And, my recommendation is exhaust all your possibilities first. And then we go and sit with a good practitioner to talk about the ups and downs. But it does seem like once you take that road, you're committed for life. And if there's supply chain problems, like we couldn't get our refrigerators during COVID, now what about the vials of testosterone? That would suck because you would tank, huh? Just like your diuretic thing.
Yep. Well, now
puff out.
Yeah. Albeit that would be temporary, but like the testosterone thing arguably won't come back. Like what, it's like
or
water
retention. A rough road or something.
Yeah. You develop bitch tits, right? It's like, it's not a pretty thing. And I think, I don't know how much faith I want to put in like the supply chain, but also just like the system to be able to just be like, okay, testosterone's going to be readily available for everyone. Like what's going to stop them 10 years from now from being like, this needs to be illegal and outlawed completely. Like what's going to stop that? We're not in control. And that's what I mean by we can't make it in our basement. It's not like if we could brew it with some rosemary and some sage and, maybe a little bit of like, whatever. It's like, then it would be a different story because you'd be like, okay, worst comes to worst, I can go like, squeeze some squirrel testicle and like mix it with this and I'm good. But then now it's not the case. You're stuck with whatever the system has for you. And that's what scares me is like, I'm just like, again, like I'm all about performance. I have no one gauging like my score. I'm not a professional athlete. So there's no reason for me to not go on TRT other than the fact that I don't want to be hooked on something that I cannot make, that I cannot control.
Yeah. Besides that, if I gave you a lifetime supply, and you realized you could get a 10% boost as the focused, attentive dad, as well as doing better in the gym, would you see any downsides or?
It's a good question. I see that's actually a really good question, because I think there are downsides that we don't know yet. And I still think it's a synthetic hormone.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm pretty adamant about, like, I'm pretty against synthetic vitamin D. Vitamin D is a hormone, and we take it in a synthetic form. So I usually recommend people take cod liver oil to get a concentrated like food form. Like, think about it. We're taking a synthetic hormone here. Yeah. Like what does that dysregulate? What other systems does that dysregulate? We take synthetic vitamin D, you're depleting bioavailable retinol A, so then you're depleting A. So then, like, okay, so the same thing would come to mind with testosterone until I'm symptomatic. So that's what my doctor had told me. It was like, because I questioned it, I was like, should I go on this? Like, here's my career. I'm redlining all the time. Like,
here's my career.
Like, here's what I do.
I need the six pack.
Like, I gotta, well, I mean, it's not even like, I don't even see it as that. I just feel like performance wise and energy at home, energy in the office,
level.
Like the work level, I'm redlining. Like, do I run myself into the ground? And the doctor's just like, are you symptomatic? I'm like, no, I still perform great. I'm still a good dad.
Yeah.
He's like, then there's no reason. So it's one of those things, if you were to hand it to me right now, I'd probably say I'll wait until I'm symptomatic. And then when I'm symptomatic, if that comes something that would help me, then that's great. And I think that should be the answer for everybody. It's that's like, great. You shouldn't also just look at your blood levels, because there are people that are at a 200 level test, and that tells you your serum levels. It doesn't tell you what's actually binding to a receptor and your actual real levels that are active. So it doesn't tell you.
Yeah, Sean Baker's got his video about that, or article. His testosterone's in the 200s, and he's setting the world record in the Concept 2 rower, so he's not symptomatic. Yeah.
You got to pay attention to your symptoms and be careful not to psychosomatic kind of placebo affect your way into that.
Or the comparison culture, and you're seeing guys getting better results faster, and so you want to keep up with the pace that's set. So do we have time to talk about the evolving use of restrictive dietary strategies for peak performance and optimization? And you talk about the amazing success of using intermittent fasting to get your weight off your body, and keto, and all the things that you've talked about on all your videos. And I've written a lot about these topics for many years and used them and practiced them. And I've kind of had a recent awakening to rethink the strategic use of these based on your category. So if we're both good metabolic health and good fitness level and good body composition, maybe we're in a different category than someone who needs to lose 50 pounds. I turn the mic over to you. Where do we go, man?
Yeah. And so, there's starting to be some more research that's starting to come out on like metabolically healthy and lean people fasting, because most of the research is on diabetics or on metabolically unhealthy, where the science is pretty strong in favor of fasting working well for that, right? But what about when you start talking about performance and so my philosophy with fasting nowadays has shifted quite a bit from where it did when I had freshly off the boat of losing weight, right? Like, I used to toot the horn to the point of like I should never said everyone should do this at all. I was actually really good about that, but I was like, this is effective. This is fucking effective. Now my stance is more like, hey guys, like, this is a hormetic stressor and should be treated as such. How do you treat other stressors? How do you dose exercise? How do you dose cold plunge? How do you dose sauna? You should just use like fasting the same way. Dose it, treat it as a stressor. And maybe it shouldn't be just like how you live your life because it's the best way, right? So for me, I still fast like 2 days a week, but I do like an 18-hour, and I'm very conscious of making sure I get enough calories in during my eating period. And I do it just because it's a stressor to my body. I love training in a fasted state, but I also love pushing the boundaries just enough, right? So is it restrictive? I think intermittent fasting has made me very non-restricted. I think it's given me a lot more flexibility. I think for me, again, as a black and white type thinker, like, it was very nice for me still is very nice for me to have a break from food and then have flexibility a little bit more in the time frame that I do get to eat. I actually feel like I get to eat a little bit more of what I enjoy and things like that.
Yeah. You earned it.
Yeah, in a weird way. Like, I don't say I earned it, but I mean, I know that, like, hey, I've only got 4 hours to eat. Like, it's going to be hard for me to do as much damage, but you can still do damage, but so it's a little more flexible.
Yeah.
I think that the restrictive diets come into play when you start demonizing certain things, and that's where it can be a little bit problematic.
Yeah. It's a big difference between a strategy and a demonization.
Yeah. Like I feel fasting is very liberating. Like I don't feel it as restrictive. And trust me, I've been called every name in the book, like for talking about fasting and touting the benefits of it. Like, you know, you're orthorexic, you're killing people, you're giving people eating disorders. I'm like, do you even watch my content? Because I'm not even remotely talking like that. I think it's very liberating. I think for people that have serious food addictions, it's very liberating because they just take a break and then they come back to it. But restrictive dieting, I think there's just such a difference between people that are metabolically unhealthy and are willing and wanting to change versus people that are normal BMI, normal health, normal metabolic function, doing these things out of obsessive nature or just because what we call the optimized bros, where they're trying to squeeze every 0.5% of optimization when the first thing they should be focusing on is just get out and get moving and clean up your diet a little bit, you know? I know Lane Norton talks about that a lot. And sometimes he pisses people off. He pisses a lot of people off, but I know he pisses people off when he talks about that because he blanket statements it. You're like, hey, calories in, calories out, you should just move.
Yeah.
But we got to realize like who he's talking to and who he's addressing. Like he's talking to try to negate the people that are just like the optimized bros that are like, you need to pay attention to this. This food's going to kill you. And which I don't think is wrong to say X food is going to kill you or whatever. Yeah. So he's trying to counteract that by saying like, we need to focus on just getting moving and that's what's important.
Yeah.
But
they're not mutually exclusive. They both make excellent points. Yeah.
So with keto, I'm in the same boat. Like I don't feel like keto is restrictive because I feel like keto is just another tool in your toolbox. And
I just mean by restrictive, I mean, you know, some parameters are put in place that are restricting the time that you can eat to a certain period.
Got it.
Or keto, you're restricting carbs. And so it's a strategy that's instead of a free-for-all of consuming nutritious food. I mean, we want to be restrictive with our diets because we want to get rid of processed food, and I don't think anyone's arguing that. You're not getting any criticism so far from trashing, junk food.
Well, that's the operative thing though, is that like if I'm talking to 3.5 million people on YouTube, a lot of those people that I'm talking to are addicted to hyperpalatable foods. If I told them to just eat intuitively, they would run themselves into the ground with terrible food that's distorting our signals in our brain. There's no denying that hyperpalatable fats plus hyperpalatable carbs creates a very unnatural orchestra of fucking fireworks in your brain that's going to make you want to eat more and feel a certain way and dopamine hits and this and that and the other. That is not natural and is not normal. And I cannot tell you to eat intuitively if that's the food that you're eating because your signals are going to be completely fucking distorted. But if I say, hey, I'm going to lock you in a room and the only thing I'm going to give you is unlimited sweet potatoes, unlimited broccoli, unlimited, wholesome fruits, and unlimited
bean to bar dark chocolate, 85%.
Yes.
All that stuff.
And unlimited, good quality meat.
Yeah.
I would say eat ad lib, like eat as much as you want.
What a great, I've never heard that hypothetical before. That's awesome. We're going to lock you in a room and you have unlimited buffet.
Yep.
You're going to be okay.
Yep.
You're going to be
and
okay.
You're going to have a squat rack and a treadmill. And you'll probably feel like working out.
Swimming pool. Yeah. Dr. Robert Lustig, Metabolical, one of the great leaders of policy and anti-sugar crusader, he stakes his reputation. I pinned him during the podcast. I said, "Really? You say it's that simple?" And he said, "If you just ditch processed foods, you can't become obese. You can't get diabetes. You can't become metabolically unhealthy. It's impossible." And Mark Bell's like, no way, I can eat my way through steaks to the point where I'll get fat. But it's a very good argument to say if you get rid of those addictive, tendencies and you just lock yourself in a room with good food, it's pretty difficult to overeat your omelets, your steaks, and your broccoli at a certain point. I mean, maybe you're going to have a rebound effect and just like kind of your story, the backward story of, Jack in the Box, where at some point, 2 steaks is enough, and 3 is just you're going to be good to go. You're not going to need it, not going to want it.
Yeah. Do you feel that we need to be doing any more weight loss studies? Do you think weight loss studies need to even be done anymore?
Well, that's a good question.
I mean, I got asked that question on Simon Hill's podcast, which Simon Hill is I will say, you know Simon?
I've heard of him.
I mean, out of all the vegans, he's the one that would actually have the potential to connect with people without offending and getting a lot of opposition, because at the end of the day, I guess it's cheeky to say he's just another meathead, not literally, but he's just like a dude that's, he's pretty jacked, and he's all about, he preaches a little bit of a different gospel than the rest of the vegan community, where he's like, protein is king, do whatever you can to get protein. Wow. Although he's talking about it from a plant-based perspective. Yeah. And I try to be open to all sides, and he's just a phenomenal human being that is really smart and really well-versed and just very open to whatever diet you're doing. Obviously we conflict, but we come to terms on almost everything else other than the fact that he eats plants and I eat meat. Like, So, he asked me that. He was like, so based upon all of this, like, do you think like we're just like, is this just BS? Do we need to, like, we know what causes like weight gain. Do we need to keep doing weight loss studies, or do we need to start looking more at things like this? At like how much processed food can we actually eat? Can we actually overeat? What happens? Like, and I tend to agree. I mean, I think we know some of the signs of, metabolically it's happening with weight gain. I don't know if we need to put people in a room and be like, who loses more weight? I think we need to be more like, what diets elicit what biomarkers, and like that might help. I don't know. It's an odd question.
Or just, Lane Norton reduces it to the concept of energy toxicity, which I love. Yeah. It's too much food being stored versus not enough being, burned. And
that can be broken down into whether it's saturated fat, whether it's carbohydrates, whatever. It's just too much fucking energy.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about, this is an assertion that Jay Feldman made, which is very interesting, about the hyperpalatable foods that combine sugar and fat. And he says that your ability to generate energy internally is compromised by the chemical and the processed foods, such that they're not inherently addictive or inherently evil. It's just that they're messing up your metabolism. That's why they're bad. And so he puts this example of ice cream is cream and sugar. So we have saturated fat from the animal with some beneficial health properties, and then we have sugar, which is easily burned in the cells when we exercise. So ice cream is not an evil, hyper palatable, addictive food, and it kind of spins the story a little bit when you think about, if you can just get healthy by any means necessary, including the Lane Norton strategy of losing 20 pounds by any means necessary, and all of a sudden your blood markers are all better, could you then be better adapted to hit some ice cream once in a while with no ill effects and not go down the slippery slope or whatever,
Wouldn't it be wild if we just told people that were very overweight and metabolically dysfunctional, be like, guess what? If you successfully lose this weight, you can get to eat ice cream again. Oh. Like, it's like, because that just popped into my head. It's like, these people feel so, like, is that the reward system? Because I agree. I eat ice cream now and then. Yeah. Like, I have a pretty dang squeaky clean diet for the most part, but dude, I enjoy good food. Like, I don't eat gluten and I don't eat trans fats. I avoid those two things. Yeah. And the gluten is just because it doesn't agree with me, not because I have any real reason other than that. Yeah. And like, so it's not uncommon to see me having a small bowl of ice cream. Like, but I'm very metabolically healthy. I'm very, very active, and I probably incinerate it really quickly. Yeah. And I've used similar. It's funny. I haven't heard Jay Feldman talk about that specifically, and I use that analogy all the time to talk about pizza. I'm like, what if you had a beautiful sourdough crust pizza with tremendous cheese on it? You've got lycopene from the tomato sauce, all these antioxidants. You've got some good quality ground chicken or ground turkey or ground beef on it. Yeah. Like, individually, those nutrients are all really good. So why is pizza bad? And then, so then it kind of makes you think, well, then, okay, there's the dual fuel hypothesis. There's all these other things, like maybe we're not designed to be consuming those things at the same time. Like, right, maybe that's, and you think from an evolutionary standpoint, like maybe it would be really hard to find copious amounts of fat and protein and copious amounts of carbs at the same time. So maybe that's where
the Hadza do it when they kill the baboon and get the honey hive.
Yeah, it's like, so it's, or is the focus just on like the whole like tribe is like going out to like kill the baboon, and they're not so much focused on the gathering aspect because they got the baboon. So it's like, but even still, if we ate the baboon plus the honey, like we're probably not consuming 500 grams of carbs and 200 grams of saturated fat. Yeah. Like, that's just energy toxicity plus a potential of dual fuels that maybe we can't, put ourselves in metabolic gridlock, so to speak, is the actual term. And it can happen. We've seen it in energy toxic states, like when you have too much energy. Yeah. At that point, when you have fats and carbs together, you do result in metabolic gridlock, where the mitochondria can only shuttle so much fuel from both sides in at one time. However, the research is lacking when you're in an energy deficient state. So if you're in a deficit, a serious deficit, you arguably could have fats and carbs just fine. But once you're in a surplus, it's harder and harder. When you're in a surplus, it's hard to, or let me rephrase this. When you're a surplus, it's seemingly harder to absorb properly utilized fats, and it's seemingly harder to properly utilize carbs, and it's even harder to properly utilize them at the same time. So
if you're burning them at the same time, though,
but are you really burning them if you're in a surplus at that point in time? So then comes the question, like, or are you just in storage mode? Are you going through de novo lipogenesis and you're also storing the fats at the same time? And your mitochondria is trying to deal with it. It's somewhat rhetorical. Like I don't know the answer, but I know that there are studies that are on metabolic gridlock, which are fascinating. They're rodent model, but they're just super interesting, where you see, like, if you feed a bunch of fats, they can kind of deal with it. If you feed a bunch of carbs, they can kind of deal with it. But when you feed them both at the same time, it's like an inflammatory mess, and they call it metabolic gridlock, where basically mitochondrial transport, CPT1 to bring the fats in, as well as, GLUT4 translocation, all just go like, you can't do it. The body's just like, fuck it, I can't handle it. And again, rodent model, so can't take it to the bank, but it's so fascinating. I think more research needs to be done.
And that might be quite a common occurrence in average modern human.
Yeah, I agree.
Who's in energy. I mean, the glycogen stores are full. They're not exercising, and then they're getting all these hyperpalatable foods that are putting together both.
Yep.
Maybe there is a lot of gridlock going on.
Yeah, totally could be. It's just, it's interesting food for thought, because it's like, is that the answer to why that otherwise healthy pizza becomes a problem? Yeah, Charles Poliquin used to talk about that all the time. He was interesting cat, because all his stuff was very anecdotal and very theory-based, but he had some good points on some stuff.
Oh, yeah. I love listening to his stuff. And Cynthia Monteleone, she's a coach in Hawaii who's a big proponent of his, and has some really wild stuff, but worth reflecting on. Yeah. So today, what are your big dietary principles, your pillars that you adhere to that work for you?
I try to get 50 to 60% of my carbohydrate sources from fruit. The rest usually comes from, like, potatoes, whether it's be sweet potatoes or red potatoes. The occasional like lentil type thing. So I would say I eat a very hybrid, heavy animal-based Mediterranean. So it's like I take the Mediterranean approach. I reduce a lot of, like, the leafy greens and increase, like, the more cruciferous, because I'm a fan of that. Increase the fruit and definitely increase the protein. I eat probably 2 to 3 times as much as, like, the Mediterranean would recommend as far as animal protein. So, like, I've very, very hybridized Mediterranean. I think the Mediterranean has a lot of interesting properties. I think where it falls flat and falls short is their recommendations on protein. So I think the ratio of, I followed a Mediterranean keto for a very long time. That was how I did my keto diets, I was lean meats and lots of monounsaturated fats, lots of olive oil, lots of macadamias, lots of avocado, things like that fit that Mediterranean profile. Now, as I've started to increase the amount I train and I've just done more running, I was like, I just simply need more carbohydrates to, I shouldn't say I don't need them. I feel better with my training volume if I increase the carbohydrates.
Right. It's possible for you to continue training with lower carbs. You just don't feel as good.
Yeah, and I lived that way for so long that I'm like, this is the best way. And don't get me wrong, like, my cognitive was better on keto. Like, we'll say that. I was clearer. Wow. There's no doubt.
What do you attribute that to? The actual fueling of the brain?
I think it's probably literally the ketones themselves. Yeah.
And you measure your levels, or?
Yeah, and funny enough is, even when I'm eating, because I still don't eat a lot of carbs, like, even high carb days are still like maybe 150, like, it's not a ton. I'm still, like, for a good half of the day, still producing ketones. Like, that's how much my body incinerates them. And I think people don't realize, is, like, once you're super active, like, you being a endurance athlete for so many years, like, you probably never measured your ketones because there really wasn't a way to, other than the urine strips at that time. I would guess that, like, almost all of these endurance athletes are in a state of ketosis more than half the time,
Oh, yeah.
Like, so it's like they're getting the benefits. So for me nowadays, I will still keto maybe 4 months out of the year. I go through periods where I use it as a hormetic stressor. I use it for my brain. I try to do it in winter time when I feel like it makes more sense. I'm like, summer, there's beautiful fruits out. There's great stuff. Organic fruits are just flourishing. And I'm just like, fuck it. Like, I want to take advantage of that. Like, I love fruit. So I eat a lot of fruit. And my meat sources are usually fairly lean, just because I've got some gallbladder issues that run in my family. So when I start increasing like saturated fat from meat, I just bloat. I don't feel that great. So it's kind of personal preference. I try to keep my saturated fat intake to like 20% of my total fat because I'm just a huge monounsaturated fat fan. So I try to load my fats with olive oil and things like that.
Yeah.
So it sounds pretty flexible on the surface. It really is. And I try to just eat as close to the earth as possible. I limit the processed stuff, the occasional ice cream, the occasional gluten-free pancake, whatever, you know.
So that's way too much to fit on a book cover. I'm sorry that, you know, the hybridized Thomas DeLauer Mediterranean version modern, but it's been a lot of trial and error to get to this point. Sounds pretty sensible. Would you, if we brought in the most astute critic, like what would you say to someone that would challenge this pattern of eating, if anybody? I mean, do you think there's any critique there?
I'd say look at my visceral adipose tissue.
Right.
Look at my performance.
Yeah.
Look at my recovery. Look at my just overall energy. Look at my libido. Look at my blood work. Look at my cholesterol. And you tell me if I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
Like, so, because that's personal to me. Yeah. That doesn't mean that you could do this diet and have the same effects, but I really think that I'm really working hard to find what works well for me.
It sounds like what you have to offer is that would work well for many, many people. And maybe you can answer this as opposed to like, what's your takeaway from the carnivore message that's strongly communicated by Saladino and Baker and the others? And it makes a lot of sense if you have this reactivity that you suffer from. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like this is where individualization comes in, where someone can, you know, swear that 100% carnivore works best for them, or vegan, they don't do well when they eat any animal products? I mean,
yeah. Well, I think with carnivore, you eliminate so many variables, man. You're going to feel great. Like I mean, you are really eliminating most of the inflammatory things. My concern is that are you eliminating them so much that if you ever do reintroduce them, you feel like horrible. Which
I wonder if there's reference about that, anecdotes.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild because then you're like, you know, okay, well, hence why the tribalism can get so strong with that. Be like, well, I went carnivore and next time I had a bean, I felt terrible.
Yeah.
Like, so carnivore, I can't believe I ever ate those. I must have been feeling like that all the time. No, you probably weren't. What was going on is like, you've probably squelched. If you sit down and you eat any food, you're going to have an inflammatory response. Food is inflammatory. It's the way it is.
So is exercise, right?
I said that one time. I said that, you know, talking about food being inflammatory, I got destroyed by a few people because they were just like, you're so orthorexic. He's even telling us that food is inflammatory. Like, oh my gosh! Like this was supposed to be a benign statement to actually let you relax. It's to say like whether you drink that Pepsi or you eat that salad, it's all inflammatory. Like, and that means that you have inflammation when you eat. Like calories do that. And I guess my point with that is like with carnivore, like you do cut that inflammation down. So if that's a way of life that you're willing to commit to, I think it works just fine. And I think that some people really feel phenomenal on it. And I think it's a great message in general because it teaches people to just eat close to the earth. And then I think maybe then it gives them the power to kind of add things back in. But I think the worst thing you could do is like go carnivore and then decide to like add processed food back in. It's like, I think the natural evolution is maybe someone goes carnivore, has some fruit, and then who knows, maybe we'll see Paul Saladino adding, you know, nuts in here and there. And so like, oh, nuts aren't so bad. You know, maybe he's walking this line too, right?
Well, to his credit, especially with the introduction of carbs, you know, it's like he probably got criticized a lot for that, but I think we're all walking the path and trying to remain open-minded. And I think that's how I started this food discussion is like, I'm, you know, rethinking these tools that I use like fasting and keto, because at my age, trying to hang with you doing the 21-minute workout, like I'm just looking for nutritious fuel to perform and recover and, you know, kind of narrow my focus to that.
Yeah. I love that mantra because I've seen you talk about it a lot and I've kind of tried to adopt that perform. It's just simple, you know? Yeah.
High fives right there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to Thomas DeLauer, everybody. Where can we find you?
More like where can you not?
Where can we hide from you?
Where can you hide from me?
Where can we find some critics? Well, in some of the comments to the videos.
But if you want a fun time, like no, actually the comments on my videos aren't bad. It's usually it's, you know, I take that back. Like honestly, like in the grand scheme of things, like other than people thinking that I'm V-shred, like you know, because they literally get us confused, which is ridiculous, but. Nah, it's generally pretty tame.
I would like you to share what you told me on the hiking trail, because I think that's a really good thing for all of us to reflect when we engage in internet banter back and forth and it gets heated. Like, what's your strategy to deal with a hater?
every human just wants to be heard, you know, and I think I've learned that since having kids, like, and, you know, any male that's ever been in a relationship with a female, and the female is always saying like, I don't want you to fix it. I just want you to hear me. And men have a hard time taking that sometimes, but I've really tried to learn from that and be like, even when people are commenting because it's just what's popping into their head at the moment, and unfortunately we have the ability to just stream of consciousness, like type that out. A lot of times they just want to be heard, you know? So I try to acknowledge, be like, wow, like I'm sorry that this feels this way, or like, that's a very real thing. Like, let me try to correct that. Like, I hope that you can find value in some of my other videos. Like, if they say something like, I didn't like this video.
That video sucked. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I understand.
Try the other 781. Yeah.
I think it was like 2,800 something.
God.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, people.
Cool.
Good words to end on. Thank you for listening, watching.